The first thing you notice about a man whose heart has stopped is the color. It leaves fast, faster than you expect, even the first time, even the 10th time. The skin goes from warm to the color of old candle wax in under a minute, and the eyes go somewhere else, somewhere distant, like they already know what the rest of the body hasn't figured out yet. I was kneeling on cold linoleum in a hospital hallway with both hands locked around a 22-year-old sternum, and I was thinking about that color, about the way it was already starting at the edges of his mouth, about the fact that I had 4 minutes, maybe less, and no surgical team, no attending, no crash cart within reach, and a nursing student standing 6 feet behind me making a sound I can only describe as controlled drowning. I was not supposed to be there. I was not supposed to be doing any of what I was about to do. I was Reese. I was the per diem nurse. I was the furniture. And somewhere behind me, through the smoke and the screaming and the noise of a hospital coming apart at its seams, Dr. Marcus Holt was realizing, for the first time in his professional life, that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. But we'll get to that. Let me tell you about the smell of a cardiovascular ICU step-down unit at 6:15 in the morning before the day shift arrives. It smells like sleep and antiseptic and the particular staleness of recycled air that has passed through too many sick lungs. It smells like the coffee from the nurse's station that has been sitting on the burner since 4 a.m. It smells like clean linen and hidden fear because everyone in those beds is afraid, even the ones who act like they aren't, and fear has a smell if you know how to find it. I knew how to find it. I had been floating to the cardiovascular step-down unit at Meridian Regional Hospital in Fredericksburg, Virginia, for 6 weeks. Before that, I floated to ortho. Before that, neuro. I had been a per diem nurse at Meridian for 11 months, which meant I was a ghost who appeared on the schedule when someone called out sick and disappeared again before anyone had to learn my last name. That was the point. I arrived at 6:15 every shift. I clocked in. I found my assignment. I did the work. I did not attend the birthday lunches or the charity raffles or the passive-aggressive white elephant exchanges at Christmas. I did not complain about the broken Pyxis in Bay 6 or the fact that the break room microwave had been smelling like burnt plastic since September. I did not form opinions out loud. I had 4 scrub sets, all the same color, a faded slate blue that photographed as gray. I wore them on rotation. I kept my hair back with the same black elastic every shift. I wore long sleeves under my scrub top even in July, and if anyone noticed the reason for that, they were polite enough not to say so. My badge said Reese, just the first name, the way all the per diem badges read. No last name, no credentials beyond the RN behind it. I was 31 years old. I looked older. I walked with a slight stiffness in my right hip that I managed well enough that most people clocked it as a quirk, not an injury. I drank my coffee black, and I ate whatever was left in the break room, and I read the night nurse's handoff notes with the quiet attention of someone reading a brief before a mission, which is exactly what it was. That morning, the morning everything changed, I arrived at 6:15 to find the step-down unit running 3 nurses short. Weekend. Summer. 2 call-outs and 1 no-show. The charge nurse, a compact woman named Dolores who had been working nights at Meridian since before the building was renovated, looked at me when I walked in the way a drowning person looks at a piece of driftwood. "Reese," she said it like an exhale, "you're getting a 5-patient load." "I'm sorry." "Okay." I took the census sheet from her hands. She blinked. Per diem nurses were not supposed to say okay to 5 patients without negotiating. They were supposed to invoke the float pool contract and request a reduced assignment and cite the staffing ratios. "I'll flag you if I need anything," I said, and I walked to the med room to start pulling morning medications. Dolores watched me go. I could feel her watching. The unit settled into its early morning rhythm. Vitals, meds, assessments, chart reviews. I moved through my 5 patients with the economy of motion that comes from doing a thing so many times in so many different conditions that the body stops waiting for the brain to authorize each step. I was assessing breath sounds, and I was also simultaneously calculating fluid balances, and I was also watching the telemetry strip running on the bedside monitor with the peripheral attention of someone who knows what a rhythm looks like when it is about to go somewhere bad. None of my patients were in crisis. Mrs. Alderman in 412 had borderline elevated troponins that I flagged in the chart and called to the resident on call, who thanked me and said they'd be discussed at rounds. Mr. Ferretti in 408 was third day post-cabbed, and his incision looked clean, and his O2 sat was 95 on 2 liters, and he asked me if I thought the Nationals were going to make the playoffs, and I told him I honestly had no idea, which was the truth. It was a quiet morning. It was the kind of morning that was a gift when you're 3 nurses short and running 5 patients and the Pyxis in base 6 is still broken. And then Dr. Marcus Holt arrived, and the morning stopped being quiet. I had been aware of Dr. Holt since my 3rd shift on the cardiovascular unit. It was impossible not to be. He was the kind of man who announced himself with his footsteps, long strides, hard soles on the linoleum, a particular cadence that made residents straighten their spines and nurses develop urgent reasons to be somewhere else. He was 54, lean, silver-templed, with the bearing of someone who had been told he was extraordinary so many times that he had long since stopped distinguishing between the opinion and the fact. He was chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Meridian. He had trained at Johns Hopkins. He had published. He had been featured in a regional magazine, the kind that gets left in waiting rooms, under a headline that read something like The Heart Whisperer. He kept a copy framed in his office. I had seen it through the open door. He did not like per-diem nurses. He did not like them philosophically, which was worse than simply finding them inconvenient. He had a theory about per-diem nurses. I had heard him articulate it to a group of residents in the hallway with the confidence of a man delivering a lecture, that they represented the failure of nursing as a profession to commit to excellence, that they were, by definition, uninvested, that an uninvested caregiver was a liability dressed in scrubs. He had a word for per-diem nurses in front of his residents. He called them furniture. "We have furniture today," he would say, not lowering his voice, when he saw a per-diem badge at the nurse's station. "Mind the furniture." I heard him say it about me on my 4th shift. I was standing at the medication cart 12 feet away, drawing up a heparin flush. I finished drawing up the heparin flush. On my 8th shift, I flagged an abnormal troponin trend in a patient of his, a 60-year-old woman 2 days post-valve replacement who had a subtle rise in her cardiac enzymes that the night nurse had noted but not escalated. I pulled the trend on the chart, compared it to her baseline, calculated the delta, and called the cardiology fellow. Holt found out. He came to the unit that afternoon, and he stood at the nurse's station, and he said, at a volume that included the entire desk, that per-diem nurses were not to contact cardiology fellows directly about his patients without going through the bedside attending first, and that flagging a troponin trend that was within expected post-surgical variance was an example of the problem with nurses who had not been adequately trained to understand the difference between a data point and a clinical picture. He said it clearly and completely, and he looked at me while he said it. I looked back at him. The patient in question developed a pericardial effusion the following morning and required an emergency pericardiocentesis. She survived. The cardiology fellow sent me a text. We had exchange numbers that said, "Good catch." I deleted the text. 3 weeks later, I quietly repositioned a post-bypass patient whose left arm was developing dependent edema from a suboptimal post-surgical placement. I elevated the arm, adjusted the pillow support, and documented it as a comfort measure. It was the right thing to do. It was also, technically, a change to the patient's positioning without a physician order. Holt was on rounds. He came to the room, saw the repositioned arm, looked at my badge, and said in front of the patient and 2 residents, "Did the furniture rearrange itself? Or did someone authorize this?" One of the residents laughed. The other one looked at the floor. I said, I documented it in the chart under comfort positioning. The patient reported improved comfort, and his radial pulse on the left is stronger. Holt looked at me for a moment. His expression did not change. "Stick to vitals," he said, and he walked out. I looked at the patient. The patient, a 67-year-old retired high school football coach named Ray who had 3 grandchildren and a picture of them taped to his four-pole, looked back at me. He shook his head slowly, the way a man does when he has seen a thing he disagrees with but lacks the energy to fight. "Don't let it bother you, honey," he said. "It doesn't," I said. This was not entirely true. but it was close enough to true that I could say it without it tasting wrong. I want to tell you something about the life I had before Meridian Regional, before the per diem badge, before the faded slate blue scrubs and the black coffee and the long sleeves even in July. I will not tell you much. I'm not built for much, but I will tell you enough. I joined the Army at 18. I became a combat medic, 68 whiskey, because I had always been good at two things: keeping calm when a room was on fire and understanding instinctively the architecture of the human body, where the blood goes, where the air goes, what happens when either of those things stops going where it's supposed to. I went to Iraq first, then Afghanistan again, then places I'm not going to name in a way that would make them identifiable, places where the mission didn't have a letterhead, where the men I served with did not exist on any official roster, where the things we did were necessary and authorized by people with the appropriate clearances, and where I, specifically, was the one who kept those men breathing when breathing became a question mark. I was good at it. I was very, very good at it. I received the Combat Action Badge after my second deployment. I received it because I had been engaged by direct enemy fire while performing trauma care on a downed operator, and I had continued performing that trauma care while under fire, and the operator had lived. His name was Calloway. He had a daughter named June who sent me a drawing of a horse 3 weeks after we got home. I kept the drawing. I do not have the badge anymore. I gave it back when I left. That is a longer story, and it is not one I'm going to tell today. I left the Army at 26. I finished my nursing degree. I had started it during a stateside rotation, and I became a civilian nurse because it was the closest thing I could find to the work that had made me feel, for the first time in my life, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But civilian nursing was not the same. It could not be the same. And I had learned, in the years since I left, that the closest I could get to the version of the work that fit me, without turning back into who I used to be, was to stay small. Stay invisible. Float from unit to unit. Do the work. Go home. Don't get attached to anything. Don't let anyone get attached to you. I was good at that too. The right hip stiffness was from an IED. The long sleeves were for the scarring on my right forearm, a decision I had made early on and had never revisited. The black coffee was from years of drinking it in places where cream and sugar were logistical problems. I was just the per diem nurse. I was the furniture. That was the plan. It was a Tuesday in October when the plan stopped working. I was on the step-down unit, 40 minutes from the end of a 12-hour shift. My patients were stable. My charting was current. I had eaten half a granola bar at 2 p.m. and the rest of it at 6, and I was thinking about the drive home and whether I had anything in the apartment worth cooking or whether this was a cereal over the sink kind of night. The vibration started in my feet, not the building's standard mechanical hum, not the HVAC system cycling. This was lower, rhythmic, a displacement of air at a frequency that traveled through concrete and steel and linoleum and into the bones of anyone who knew what they were listening for. I set down my pen. Dolores, at the nurse's station, looked up from her screen. "Did you feel that?" I didn't answer her. I was already moving toward the window at the end of the corridor. 3 floors below, in the hospital's main parking lot adjacent to the ambulance bay, the situation was immediately, viscerally clear. A transport van, white government contract style, the kind that moves patients and personnel between military installations and civilian medical facilities, had come off the service road at speed and collided with the concrete median barrier at the entrance to the ambulance bay. The front end was crumpled. Steam was rising from the hood. The sliding side door had been thrown open on impact and was hanging at a wrong angle. Paramedics were running from the ambulance bay entrance. A hospital security guard was on his radio. A second vehicle, an Army olive drab SUV, had pulled up behind the van, and 2 men in ACUs were pulling a third from the passenger seat, who was not walking under his own power. I counted the bodies I could see from the window. 3 that I could see, which meant there were more I couldn't. I turned away from the window. "Call a mass casualty alert," I said to Dolores. My voice was the same voice I used to request a medication. Flat, measured, informational. Get the charge supervisors on the phone. Tell them you have at least 3 military casualties incoming from a vehicle accident, unknown number, unknown severity. Tell them to activate the mass casualty protocol now not after confirmation. Dolores stared at me. Now, I said, and I walked to the elevator. The ER was already fracturing by the time I got downstairs. The mass casualty alert had not yet gone overhead. Dolores had called it in, but the system takes time. The system always takes time, but the paramedics had been radioing ahead, and the trauma bays were being hastily cleared, and the attending on duty, a senior physician named Dr. Arjunarayanan, who was competent and experienced, and who I had floated with twice before, was pulling on gloves and calling for blood, while simultaneously trying to organize a team that was not yet fully assembled. 3 soldiers had come in through the ambulance bay. The first 2 were in the trauma bays. I could see through the glass. One was conscious and shouting, which was a good sign, and one was not moving, which was not. Narayanan was on the unconscious one. The trauma team was assembling around him. The 3rd soldier was in the hallway. He was on a stretcher that had been parked against the wall near the supply corridor when the trauma bays filled, and he had been left there because the decision had been made, the triage math had been done, that the other 2 were higher priority. He was conscious. Barely. His lips were moving. His skin had already started to lose its color. He was 22 years old, maybe younger. His uniform was torn at the chest. Someone had cut away the fabric to access what was underneath, and then had been pulled away before finishing the job. His dog tags were exposed. His name tape read Okafor. I walked him. His pupils were equal and reactive, which ruled out the most catastrophic brain injuries. His breathing was rapid and shallow, 28, maybe 30 per minute, and there was a subcutaneous crackling when I pressed lightly at his left clavicle that told me exactly what I was dealing with. Subcutaneous emphysema, air in the tissue where air does not belong. I pressed 2 fingers to his carotid. Pulse, present. Thready. Fast. Too fast. His trachea was midline. For now. I looked up. The hallway was chaos. Nurses and techs moving fast in both directions. Equipment carts being wheeled toward the trauma bays. Someone on the overhead paging a surgical team. There was a nursing student, a young woman in white scrubs with a Meridian Preceptor badge, standing 6 feet away from Okafor's stretcher, holding a blood pressure cuff and making the sound I mentioned at the beginning. The sound of someone whose training has hit a wall it did not know was there. Hey, I said it sharp enough to cut through her spiral. What's your name? She blinked at me. Amara. Amara. Good. I need you to stay right here with me. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to tell you exactly what to do, and you're going to do it. Can you do that? She swallowed. Nodded. Good. I was already moving to the supply corridor. I knew this hallway. I had floated to the ER enough times to know that there was a crash cart staged near the supply room door, and that the crash cart had a thoracotomy kit in the bottom drawer. I found it. I pulled the cart. I came back to Okafor. His trachea had shifted. Slightly. Just beginning. But I could see it, a millimeter of deviation toward the right, away from the side where the air was accumulating. Attention pneumothorax in progression. The lung on his left side was collapsing, and the pressure was starting to push his mediastinum and his trachea toward the other side. And when that shift became significant, his heart would not be able to fill properly, and his blood pressure would crash, and he would code in the hallway without anyone having touched him. 3 minutes. Maybe 4. I opened the crash cart. I pulled a 14-gauge angiocath from the tray, a thick, large-bore needle, the kind that looks alarming to anyone who has not used one with intent. I found the second intercostal space on the left side of his chest, 2 finger breadths below the clavicle, along the midclavicular line. I could find it in the dark. I had found it in the dark. Amara, I said. His blood pressure cuff. Left arm. Get a reading. She moved. I heard the Velcro, the pump, the hiss of the cuff inflating. I uncapped the needle. You're not authorized to do that. The voice came from behind me. I knew the voice before I turned. Dr. Marcus Holt was standing in the hallway in his surgical cap and his monogrammed scrubs and his hard-soled shoes, and he was looking at the needle in my hand with the particular expression of a man whose territory has been entered without permission. I turned back to Okafor. His trachea is deviating, I said. He has a tension pneumo. He has approximately 3 minutes before he codes. I can see the patient. Thank you. Step away from the stretcher and call Narayanan out of Trauma 1. Narayanan is managing a traumatic arrest, I said. There is no one else. Then we wait for someone else. You are a per diem nurse, and you do not perform needle decompressions. I looked at Okafor. His lips were the color of old lavender. His O2 sat monitor, which someone had managed to clip to his finger before abandoning the stretcher, was reading 78 and dropping. 78, said Amara, her voice very careful. His sat is 78. I drove the needle into the chest. There is the resistance of skin and intercostal muscle, and then the distinct, unmistakable hiss of air under pressure releasing through the catheter. Not a trickle, a rush, a significant, sustained release of trapped pressure that had been building behind a failing lung and pushing everything in Okafor's chest towards somewhere it was not supposed to be. Okafor sucked in air, a full breath, the first real breath he had taken, from the sound of it, in several minutes. His O2 sat monitor began climbing. 79, 82, 85, 85, said Amara. Her voice was different now, steadier. I held the catheter in place and looked up at Holt. He was staring at the monitor. It's a temporary fix, I said. He needs a chest tube in the next 10 minutes, or this reaccumulates. I need a chest tube tray, a size 28 French, and someone to manage the pleurovac suction. Holt's jaw moved. No sound came out. Doctor, I put a very specific weight on the word. Chest tube tray. He moved. I do not know what happened inside him in that moment. What pride costs what it costs to hand a thing over to the furniture. But he moved. He turned and walked to the supply corridor, and he came back with the tray, and he set it on the stretcher rail without looking at me. I looked at Amara. Gloves. Blue box on a cart. Put them on. She gloved up. Her hands are not shaking. I noted that. She was going to be a good nurse. You're going to hold the tube when I hand it to you, I said. You're going to keep it sterile. You're going to not drop it. You can do that. Yes, she said. Not a question. I found the fifth intercostal space, anterior to the mid-axillary line. I opened the tray. I took the scalpel. Okafor, I said. He was awake. He was present. His eyes found mine. This is going to hurt. I'm sorry. Stay as still as you can. He nodded once. The nod of a man who has been trained not to make his medic's job harder. I made the incision. I will not describe the next 7 minutes in their entirety. Some things do not need to be described in their entirety. What I will tell you is that at the end of those 7 minutes, Corporal Emmanuel Okafor had a properly placed chest tube connected to a functioning pleurovac. His O2 saturation was 94% and climbing. His blood pressure had come up to 90/60, and he was looking at the ceiling of the hallway with the expression of someone who has just been told by their own body that they're not going to die today. I stepped back. My hands were bloody to the wrists. My long sleeves, which I had pushed up at some point during the procedure without thinking about it, were dark with it, and the scarring on my right forearm was fully visible in the hallway lights, and I did not think about that until later. Narayanan had come out of Trauma 1. His patient was being taken to the ER. He stood at the edge of the hallway scene, looking at the chest tube, the pleurovac, the crash cart, the nursing student with bloody gloves, and the per diem nurse standing over all of it. Get him a Trauma 2, I said. He's going to need surgical evaluation and imaging. His left lung should reinflate with the tube in, but I want a repeat chest film to confirm positioning. Narayanan said, okay, just like that. He said it the way Dolores had said it when I agreed to the 5-patient assignment, like he had expected to have to argue and had not needed to. He took Okafor's stretcher and began moving it toward the trauma bay. I looked at my hands. I walked to the sink at the end of the supply corridor, and I turned on the water, and I began to wash. The ER was settling. The mass casualty alert had gone overhead by now, and the reinforcements were arriving. Nurses from the floors, the trauma surgery team, the extra attendings. The chaos was becoming organized. It was becoming manageable. I washed the blood off my hands. Dr. Holt was standing in the corridor. He had not moved. He was still holding the chest tube tray, or rather, he was still holding the packaging from the chest tube tray, the empty plastic shell of it, which he had been holding since he brought it to me and which he had apparently not set down. He was looking at the spot on the floor where Okafor's stretcher had been. I dried my hands on a paper towel. I rolled my sleeves back down. I was going to walk past him. That was the plan. Walk past him, find Dolores, figure out the status of my 5 step-down patients, finish the shift, drive home, have cereal over the sink, go to sleep. How did you know? Holt said. I stopped. The tracheal deviation. His voice was different. The authority was still in it. The way a structure remains in a building even after the electricity goes out, but something underneath, it was different. At that stage of progression, it was barely visible. How did you know? I looked at him. His face was not what I expected. It was not angry. It was the face of a man who has just watched something happen that reorganizes, against his will, the categories he has built his understanding of the world around. I've seen it before, I said. Where? I did not answer that question. I put the paper towel in the trash, and I walked back toward the elevators. I was at the nurse's station on the step-down unit, finishing my end-of-shift charting when Dolores appeared at my elbow. There's someone downstairs asking for you, she said. For me. For you. Specifically. She paused. It's a man in a dress uniform. I set down my pen. He said he'd wait, Dolores added. He said he was in no hurry. He said he had driven from Fort Belvoir, and he was not leaving without talking to you. I looked at the chart. My charting was done. The shift was over. My patients were handed off. I took the elevator downstairs. He was standing in the main lobby, near the information desk, and he was in fact in full dress uniform, Army service uniform, the blue one with the braid and the ribbons and the insignia, and he was not a young man, somewhere north of 50, with the particular physical economy of someone who had spent a significant portion of his adult life doing hard physical things in difficult conditions and had never quite come down from that baseline. He saw me before I saw him. He turned when I came out of the elevator, and I recognized him the way you recognize someone not from their face, but from how they hold their body. I had not seen Colonel David Marsh in 4 years. Callahan, he said. Sir. The word came out before I could decide not to say it. He looked at me, at the faded slate scrubs, at the per-diem badge, at the long sleeves. I heard what happened tonight, he said. News travels fast. Okafor is one of mine. The driver radioed when they brought him in. He paused. I also heard about the other two. Narayanan's resident told the nursing supervisor that a float nurse managed attention pneumo in the hallway and placed a chest tube unassisted. He needs follow-up imaging. His left lung. I know. They're handling it. Marsh looked at me for a long moment. You've been here 11 months. Yes, sir. You've been emptying bedpans for 11 months. I did not say anything to that. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his jacket and took out something small. A case. The kind that holds a coin or a pin. He opened it and he set it on the information desk between us, and I looked at what was inside, and the breath went out of me in a way that I could not entirely control. My combat action badge. Not a replacement. The original. I knew it by the slight where on the lower left corner of the mount, a detail so small that I had forgotten I had noticed it until I was looking at it again. Ow, I said. I keep track of my people, Marsh said simply, even when they don't want to be tracked. The lobby was not empty. There was a family near the main entrance, a security guard at the desk, a nurse from admissions walking through with a clipboard, and Dr. Marcus Holt, who had apparently followed me from somewhere upstairs and was standing 12 feet away near the elevator bank with his monogrammed surgical cap in his hand and his hard-soled shoe silent for once on the lobby floor. Marsh did not look at Holt. He picked up the badge from a case. You earned this, he said. You don't get to give it back. He reached across, and he pinned it to the chest pocket of my scrub top, his hands steady and certain, the way a man's hands are when he has done a thing many times that matters. I looked down at it. It was lighter than I remembered. Or maybe I was different than I remembered. I'm not coming back, I said. My voice was level. If that's what this is. I know. Marsh closed the empty case and put it back in his pocket. That's not what this is. This is just something I should have done when you left, and I didn't, and I'm correcting that. He extended his hand. I took it. Okafor's mother, Marsh said, is going to want to thank whoever kept her son breathing tonight. I told her I'd pass along the message. He looked at me steadily. In case you were worried about going unnoticed. He turned and walked toward the main exit. The automatic doors opened ahead of him, and the October air came in cold and clear and smelling like leaf smoke and distant rain. I stood in the lobby with the badge on my chest. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I looked up. Dr. Marcus Holt was still standing near the elevator bank. He had not moved. He had not spoken. He was holding his surgical cap in both hands in front of him, and he was looking at me with an expression that I will not describe as guilt, because I do not know if he was capable of guilt precisely, but which I can describe as comprehension. The comprehension of a man who has been operating with incorrect data for a long time and has just been shown the error. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked down at his surgical cap. I walked to the elevator bank. "Callahan," he said. I stopped. I did not turn around. "The Tropin and Trend," he said. "And Mrs. Ventura. 6 weeks ago. You were right." The elevator arrived. The doors opened. "I know," I said. And I got in. Okafor was extubated 2 days later. His left lung re-expanded fully on the follow-up CT. He was transferred to a military medical facility on day 4, and I did not hear anything else about his recovery, because I did not ask. I came back to my next scheduled shift on the step-down unit. I clocked in at 6:15. I found my assignment. I did the work. Nobody called me furniture. Nobody called me anything except Reese. The badge stayed in my locker, in its case during my shifts. I was not the kind of person who wore it on my scrubs, but I was the kind of person, apparently, who kept it, who did not give it back again. Some things you surrender. Some things you earn the right to carry. The difference, I think, is whether you chose to put them down or whether someone told you that you had to. The fluorescent lights hummed their usual abrasive frequency in the step-down unit, and I checked Mrs. Alderman's Tropin and Trend, and I poured a cup of terrible coffee, and I kept my sleeves rolled down. And somewhere in the building, in an office with a framed magazine article on the wall, Dr. Marcus Holt sat down at his desk and did not quite know what to do with his hands. That was enough. That was exactly enough. If Reese's story stayed with you, if you've ever been told to stay in your lane, stay small, stay invisible, and known with absolute certainty that you are capable of so much more, tell me in the comments. What would you have done in that hallway? Would you have stepped forward, or would you have waited for permission? Because here's the real question this story asks. When there is no one else, and the clock is running, and the permission never comes, who are you? Hit subscribe if you want more stories about the people who never make the headlines. They're in every hospital, every firehouse, every school, wearing ordinary clothes over extraordinary lives. We're just here to make sure they get heard.